Good morning and welcome to Race Industry Now, the weekly webinar series from ePowerTrade, presented to you by ARP, Performance Plus Global Logistics, PIC, Ferrea Racing Components, Fifth Third Bank Motorsports, and today, Scriber Plastics. I am Francisque Savignan, the founder and CEO of ePowerTrade, the racing industry, every minute, every day. This is episode 440, and we're going to be talking trends in cylinder head designs with Curtis Boggs. With me this morning are Judy King, the co-founder of ePowerTrade, and our superstar host, three-time NASCAR crew chief champion, Mr. Jeff Hammond. Judy? Judy is on mute. Judy, you're on mute.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Francisque. And thank you, everybody, for joining with us. As I mentioned last week, we have had so many suppliers jump on board with us. You saw Scribner on there this morning. So just an influx of companies. And this morning on our newsletter, hopefully everybody got it, we announced that we're bringing on Andrea Brake. We worked with Andrea at our old PRI days. So we just all think alike. We're helping those small little entrepreneurial companies. So we're proud to have Andrea joining us officially. Jeff?
Well, first and foremost, let me go ahead and extend my congratulations and hearty welcome to Andrea. It's very exciting. The company continues to grow. Really excited about being a part of it. And hey, 400, and what did you say, Francis?
440.
I'm telling you right now, we're putting up the
numbers.
Have done over
200.
Really excited about being back in 2024. All right. Are we ready to go, Francis?
Yes, we are. And Curtis is on. So, Jeff, carry on.
All right, carry on. That's exactly what we're going to do. Hey, good morning, Curtis. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I really am. I mean, I'm really charged up about today's webinar because I feel like I'm talking to someone who understands some of the things that I remember back in the good old days. And I'm sure that you have advanced it all the way into modern technology, but I got to ask you, you were doing cylinder heads and working in this area in the 70s and 80s. So that meant there was some cast iron involved.
Oh! First thing you do is start off with a nightmare, right?
Hey, I lived some of those days, and I appreciate them. That's the reason why I wanted to bring it up. I don't want anybody to think that you had it easy, because I know that part of your history involved making that jump from doing it by hand to doing it by machine. So I wanted to touch on that.
So, Jeff, first of all, I got to say that it's a real privilege for me to be on with you. We're two old guys in the industry, and the experience you have, I'm really looking forward to today. I know some of the things that I'd like to get into are conversations that you're going to directly relate to. So this is going to be fun. So to answer your question, in the early days, the first version of this, the business I had was called Boggs Racing Heads. And I rented a little shop out in Chesapeake, Virginia. I rented that from an engine builder, John Bray. And actually you might even know John Bray, circle track guy.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. John was kind enough to lend me some space, and I used to get pallet loads of big block Chrysler cylinder heads from Herb McCandless. So, and it was all pallet load of heads, big block heads, all ported by hand. And I didn't really enjoy life very much in those days. It was brutal. It was brutal. Until the CNC machines came around, there was nothing easy about it. Yeah.
No, it definitely wasn't. And I think the thing that's interesting is that I remember the days working at Juniors, and I was allowed to go up in the cylinder head when we had raw castings. And I was allowed to do some of that to help Bill Allman, so he wouldn't have to do all of it. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? When I say do all of it, I mean, you go in there in a white uniform the first thing that morning. By lunchtime, you look like you've been rolling in a coal bin to a certain degree, with all the dust and the filings and grindings that you were taking out of the head. So, a lot of times he let me help a little bit before it got down to the real technical stuff. But the idea that you and people like Junior Johnson and Smokey Unick and Bill Allman at the time being able to look at something and say, let's do this because we're not getting, I mean, the right color in the piston. We want to try to change the airflow. We need to get the fuel and everything. You didn't have machines to do that. You had to do a lot of it by trial and error. You do something, you put it on a flow bench, that looks pretty good, but then you got to put it on the real deal, run it, take it back apart and say, hey, that worked. Numbers are good. Flow looks like it's good. You know where I'm coming from.
Yeah, it was a very different thing in those days. And these days, of course we rely on computers and fluid simulations and all that stuff, and we didn't have that in those days. Mm-hmm. It was all practical. So I have a formal training in fluid dynamics. So I was familiar, I'm familiar with doing practical experiments and even silly things like after you complete a set of heads, they go through the wash tank and you got them in the rinse tank and you're washing them off and you just spray the hose through the port, watch where the fluid goes. I think in the early days, John Bray thought there was something wrong with me, and I can firmly I can say there's definitely something wrong with me, but I would stand there with the hose and just watch where things went, and it went much deeper than that. I built a home built wet flow bench, with spray nozzles. We went through all those practical experiments, and that's the only way you can really get the baseline. I think I don't want to take anything away from current, cylinder head designers, but I think they have it a little bit easier than we had it in those days.
Well, you do. I mean, and again, like I say, that is the fault of our own, because technology came along and it's kind of like, are we going to stay in the Stone Age, or are we going to advance and take advantage of what we can now see? And when I say that, I was thinking about how you were describing water, fluid, whatever, solvent, how it was doing inside a cylinder head, and trying to imagine this is air and everything. But as you very well know, air is lighter, and whatever kind of gasoline or fuel you're using will react a little different than even what the solvent or water's doing. So,
sure,
you got to kind of like look at it and you got to almost like think outside the box. Will it stay attached there? Is it going to separate around this corner? Should I sharpen it? Or should I round it up? And what part and where, how are you? I don't know. I think what I'm trying to say is you were trying to mix fuel and air together at that time, and you didn't have any other way to do it except by stuff like what you're doing. You're totally immersing yourself. I'm trying to become a particle inside the cylinder head and think, what kind of ride is this? What kind of roller coaster ride am I on?
Right. Well, the real trick, of course, we're dealing with fuel injection in a lot of situations today, so that's changed things a little bit. But your real mixing happens at the carburetor. So the bigger trick, at least in my eyes, the bigger trick became, not to undo what the carburetor did. So, you're always bending airflow around a push rod pinch, or, a head bolt that's sticking in the port, or, you have some obstruction that you're trying to get air around without separating air and fuel. And that, to me, that was always the bigger challenge. Separation over the short turn of the intake port. Your airspeed's always higher over the short turn. So you have to be careful with separation and what happens there. So I looked at it in kind of a different way. I know a lot of people think about trying to always mix the fuel. I always, went back to trying not to disturb what the fuel injector or the carburetor had already done.
So what you're saying right there is you already are saying air and fuel have been mixed, and now it's my job not to separate them.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
You think about it, that little magic funnel that sits on top of the intake manifold carburetor, does a fantastic job of, mixing air and fuel and atomizing fuel. So, as long as that job is happening and, you have some good airspeed through the port, stuff like that, you should be able to maintain that. The real trick really came from looking at, again, trying to maintain that. And the trick came from looking at pressure differentials. So, you have high speed pressure differential at the carburetor, and taking a small block, V8 with 18-degree heads on it as an example. Now you have, a pinch at the push rod. So there's another high speed differential, and then of course you have your third that's at, ideally at the valve, at the throat underneath the valve. So managing the changes in those pressure differentials, is another important thing. You run airspeed, air mixture with fuel in it, you run that through and get it to the push rod pinch. And let's say, you really pinch it down at the push rod, your airspeed, jacks through the roof. And then you go into a big valve bowl and big area over the short turn, and you dump all that airspeed. That's a great way to separate fuel. So, all of that's there. There's so much to managing fuel. It's obviously there's a lot to it. Pressure differentials was always my big thing, and even today still is. I kind of care less about flow numbers, and a CFM number. You have to be in the ballpark. I mean, it can't be junk. You have to have good laminar flow, or at least good flow that you don't have any turbulence that you don't intend to have. But the pressure differentials were always, that was the number one thing I was always looking at.
So what is the biggest change in technology, and what has had the most influence as far as the cylinder head, design to engine horsepower?
This is an easy one.
Oh, okay.
CNC machines.
Okay.
And I'll share, my personal experience, and I'm sure it was the same for most people that got involved with CAD and CNC machines at the time. So I had the privilege of I got the second 5-axis CNC machine that Centroid ever built. And to this day, those are still some of my closest friends. They're just wonderful, wonderful people to work with. And the first time I was actually able to digitize ports, bring it into CAD, and accurately measure the cross sections. I was nowhere near what I thought I had. The old school way of measuring port areas and cross sections, we'd do our rubber molds, would fill it with rubber, push the mold out, cut it, graph paper sections and all this stuff. And I had no idea how inaccurate I was. So, that was, for me, that was a major step. Soon as I discovered that one thing, and I could adjust my cross sections, and I could very accurately control my air speeds, my pressure differentials, it was a game changer. That changed everything. And I'm sure it's safe for everyone.
Did you use, how did you go about doing that? Was it a roller arm deal? What was it that allowed you to do these cross sections accurately?
So at the time, this is early on in the process, and I had a preference for digitizing in the spindle of the CNC machine. Okay. Which is, that's how Centroid started out doing that. And I had a preference for that because it located stuff very accurately on the machine, and I didn't have other location issues. So I did that a lot. So I would digitize on the CNC machine. I literally would send a probe through in a 5-axis program, and if I didn't have a pre-existing program, sometimes it took a day or two to get it to go through there. At least in the early days. I know they've got their programming down pretty well now. But I would get that scanned data, that I could bring it into the CAD program, or I tended to use Mastercam for a lot of CAD design stuff too. I did, most of my stuff in Mastercam. But I could bring that model in, and then I could section it and measure my cross-sectional areas anywhere that I wanted. And so, like I said, that, all of a sudden I had this, fantastic amount of control. And again, it wasn't just, control over, just making it bigger or smaller or that, and all that, the control you have over the shape, which was another, big improvement.
Right.
But dealing with those pressure differentials, and now, when I go through the push rod pinch, and I expand it over the short turn, you've got to turn it, you've got to slow the air a little bit to get it over the short turn. So there's always expansion. There's storage rates. There's this, particular size that I always liked, valve bowls, and, which was part of the short turn and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I could control what happened with the airspeed very accurately. At least in my mind, as you know, we never know what's really going on in there.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. I do.
I to this day, a good difficult engine combination will teach me a lesson or two even today. It never stops.
Can I ask you real quick, when you were able to start doing that, what percentage of improvement do you think you saw in a set of cylinder heads as it pertained to the dyno, or wherever you felt like was a gain? I mean, because again, you got repeatability like you've never had before, right?
Right.
So when you're able to transfer all that, what did you see? Because again, every engine builder or head guy I've ever been around, they always want to know, what's the bottom number? I mean, how much more torque do we make, or how much more power do we make? Right. Do we make? Where did it go? I mean, what did it show?
Yeah, and that's interesting. That's an interesting question, because it's a little bit deeper than that. So first of all, the repeatability. I mean, a good cylinder head porter, good cylinder head grinder, usually doesn't have repeatability problems hand grinding. So although that was an advantage, like I said, the bigger advantage was all the other control that we now gained, and all the insight to what was really happening in there. So I was always a big block guy. My early years, I worked at Sonny's, and I admittedly, I miss Sonny. What a wonderful thing that man did for me early in my career. But I was always a big block guy. So, the immediate change that I saw as soon as I started applying this to the big block, and, making some of the port cross-sectional changes, airspeed changes, all of that stuff, I immediately saw, I think the first number I can really put together, if I remember right, was about 35 or maybe 40 horsepower.
Whoa.
Yeah, this was on some of the early test engines were 540s, and drag race engines. And there was some marine engines involved too, but the drag race stuff, usually 15-1, 800 or 900 lift cams, single 4-barrel cast manifold carburetor. Yeah, so there was a pretty hefty jump right off the bat.
So when you make a big jump like that, does all of a sudden, does Pandora's box get opened up as far as, how a port size, shape, and everything size and shape change in the last 20 years, as far as it goes, as far as the effectiveness of the engine combination? Did it unlock the other side of it, to where all of a sudden, oh, well, guess what we can do now? We can change this cam. We can put these kind of pistons in. We can do this kind with the bore and stroke. Did it pretty much just like have an avalanche?
Absolutely. That's a Pandora's box that's still open today, at least for me. So, staying on the big block Chevrolet, today, some of the stuff that my current programs, which I don't own RFD anymore, but but Dan at RFD, they're still selling those programs, and they're all definitely front running programs. Well, that was a progression that started with that CNC machine. When I first discovered the capabilities there, the light bulb goes off, and for me, it has been a never ending process since then, trying stuff, going different directions. And as from being a winning crew chief, you make one change and it shows you something and it tells you a direction to go in, and you start following that rabbit hole, and then it tells you to go someplace else. And it's a never ending process. I made power with big block heads, conventional style big block heads today that I never thought was possible. And I never thought it was possible. So yeah, it opened Pandora's box.
Okay, along that same line. So with what you've learned through these years, what has been the most wow factor as far as changing the personality of an engine?
Oh, personality of an engine. Yeah. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. So now that with CNC machines, all of a sudden we have this massive amount of control. So now what do we do with that? Well, the personality of an engine is something that I've always talked about, because, Big Block Chevrolet is a good example. There was this habit of, cylinder heads were too small. I mean, they were definitely too small. And then, you put big camshaft in it, trying to get air through the combination, and literally things couldn't breathe. Engine combinations can't breathe. And what some people thought were, proper port sizes and air speeds and stuff were just really restrictions. The more that you got the port out of the way, you made it very easy for the air, to, move into the cylinder, the more power you could make. Well, the better the cylinder head, the less camshaft you need. So now we start going down, that particular rabbit hole. How big is too big of a cylinder head? And I can tell you, I can give you some numbers. I started looking at numbers. I was building towards numbers in about 260 foot range on the flow bench, where, I know there's a lot of other very talented cylinder head people that, like little oval ports. They like airspeed as fast as possible. They think that's the magic. And in their combination, they figured out how that works, so, I've certainly discovered there's not one way to skin the cat. But I started, bigger cylinder heads, get everything out of the way, make it very easy for the engine to consume air, and that gave us the ability to start pulling camshaft out. Well, the big way to make torque, or what makes torque, right, is cylinder pressure. And it's not airspeed in a port. That'll be throttle response, but that's not torque. Torque comes from, your cylinder pressure. So all of a sudden, I have this big cylinder head on here. It's easy for the engine to consume air. I start pulling camshaft out so I can run my, cylinder pressures up. And the other thing that gave us was an engine combination that would accelerate faster. The acceleration rate of the engine itself was faster. It was easier for it to crank up, up to RPM. I hope that answers your question.
No, it does, but it also makes me start thinking about.
See, it's still a big rabbit hole, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a big rabbit hole for sure when you start trying to figure out, when you start taking cam away. But what have you found as far as, the overlap, the opening and closing of the cam, and how it works as far as that pressure inside there? Is it better to hold it longer? Do you compress it to, and just like you burp it, or do you let it, the exhaust come open and let it get clear out? You understand where I'm coming from? That sweet spot you're looking for.
Yes. So, well, I'm going to give you the deep secrets here today.
Okay.
That's kind of, all the recent, championship winning or record setting combinations, I kind of had the same method. And I would do very, very efficient exhaust ports as much as I could. And then I would use the exhaust lobe, move the exhaust lobe around to reduce overlap and build cylinder pressure. And the easy way to do this, now I'm running a cylinder head shop where I'm selling, cylinder heads to a lot of different people. I've got them out on different engine combinations and dynos. So I'm not in a situation where I've got it on a dyno and I've got, transducers in the cylinders and I can measure cylinder pressure. So my solution to that was using cranking compression. So I tracked cranking compression, from the early days at Sonny's. Is that I tracked that for a long time, and I would tune the engine combinations, the camshaft combinations. Again, it's funny how the airspeed numbers and this number is similar, but all my really good running stuff usually had a cranking cylinder pressure, 250 plus, 260, 270s. Anything up around 300 seemed to not be happy. I think the engine was working too hard to do that. So, that's the thing. I really started pulling exhaust lobe out. But, I had a very long relationship with Tim Goldsby at Bullet Cams. And I have to say that Tim was a genius there. A brilliant camshaft guy. So I would never tell him what to do. I would tell him my theory and what I thought in general, but I would never tell Tim what to do. He always came up with it.
Real quick, Curtis, before we go much further, I know we have some people that are watching and taking all this in, and I hope we're mesmerizing them. But I don't want you to forget, you got a dog in this fight too, everyone. So you want to ask Curtis a question, please don't forget you can send it to me and I'll relay it and try to get you an answer, because there again, I'm loving what I'm doing, and hopefully I'm touching some bases and hot spots that you want to have and questions answered. But if you've got something to help me out here, go right ahead and jump in, and we will I'll put you on the spot if you get somebody to not be so nervous and write us a couple questions here. How about that?
Nice. I like questions.
Continuing down this road, I know we kind of started in the cast iron days and jumped into aluminum heads and everything. So people that you saw their work, heard about their success, any of them jump out at you? I mean, as far as you take, back in the early days, Rear Morrison would help us with some of the stuff at Junior. Okay. And the crossover, I think a lot of people would be surprised that NASCAR guys would look over to drag racers for, what are you going to learn there? They're running. If they bust a head, they just pull it off the next round and put another head on. In our case, we're going to run 400 or 500 miles that afternoon and practice, something like that. And, we don't have that luxury. You know where I'm coming from? What do they know that we can't figure out? And I think, again, in talking to you, the way you approach your philosophy, I think influenced other people's philosophy.
I know in the earlier days of, and in the very early days, I was like several other shops, as far as I know. There was a lot of people like Ron. There was a lot of cylinder head guys that, the NASCAR teams would send them a set of cylinder heads, and we would, do our thing and send them back, and then they wouldn't tell us anything about it. Have no idea if it worked. So
if they called you back, wanted more, something was going right.
Yeah. If they called you back second time, you knew something was working. So those were interesting days. But cylinder head guys in those days, there was so many, but the communication wasn't what we have now. So I will say that probably, when the internet started, we first had internet forums like, Speed Talk, if you remember Speed Talk. I was early on Speed Talk. You talked about Darren Rio Morrison. Well, Darren Morgan, cylinder head guy at Rio Morrison, very, very talented individual,
Right.
was on there, and the early days of Speed Talk was this great atmosphere where, just all this sharing and, comparison and, problem solving amongst some very, very smart people. I was very privileged to be there. As far as, in today's world, who I pay attention to, from an overall business standpoint, Matt Biederman at MBE is pretty amazing.
Right.
Now they have taken CNC, to a whole nother level. They're really, really doing what they need to do with their machines. There's a lot of talent. So, I tend to pay attention to that. God, it's hard for me to think of the people I really paid attention to. Yeah.
Well, we do have a question here. This is from Dan Agnew, a gentleman I know. How you doing, Dan? Appreciate you being on today. You
Hi,
mentioned
Dan.
your backgrounds in fluid mechanics. What CAE tools did you use now, and how do you apply them?
So, as far as practical experiments, relating to fluid dynamics, it's changed as far as, wet flow stuff. I haven't done any wet flow testing in several years. And the reason for that, I went through a phase of, there's probably at least a couple of years where I was doing a tremendous amount of practical experiments with wet flow. Most of the time I had home built this fixture with, wet and dry vacuum cleaners and, spray rods from nitrous systems and all this wacky stuff to, try and simulate, atomized fuel through the engine. Well, I think after a year or two of doing those experiments, I identified enough trends that I just felt like it wasn't, I didn't have to test every cylinder head or every port design, because it became, where I kind of understood what was happening and what it liked. So today, my number one tool is a pitot probe. I can't talk. Pitot probe. Yeah, there we go. But measuring airflow on the flow bench is everything. So that's, I turn the flow bench on, and get a CFM number, and that's all wonderful. But really, I'm in there with pitot, and measuring airflow and, finding dead spots, finding active spots, checking my airspeed numbers compared to my calculated cross-sectional areas and airspeed numbers. So all really comes down to that.
So do you find yourself more challenged or having more fun messing with fuel injection, throttle bodies, carburetors? What kind of, how do they affect you, and how do they challenge you, and do you, which one you enjoy maybe more?
I enjoy them all. Ultimately what brings me the most joy is the challenge, is the problem solving. So that being said, they have different capabilities. I think we can get away with more stuff with fuel injection. A carbureted combination, plenum volumes can be sensitive. If you get plenum volume too big, you can hurt your signal at carburetor. Sometimes it won't accelerate down the track like it should. There's a balance that needs to happen there. And it seems like you can get away with, bigger plenum volumes and stuff on fuel injected combinations, at least in the drag race and the, offshore marine and things that I've worked on recently. So that seems to be less of a challenge. The bigger challenge is always comes back to the basics, I think, is, again, we're trying to master the airflow numbers, but we're trying to master the airspeed those pressure differentials. And the trick is, as the engine combinations get bigger, we get 600-700 inch big blocks, and now we have to hit the right airspeed numbers. And the challenge is always getting that proper size port in between the push rods, the head bolt holes, and everything else you got to navigate to get to the cylinder. So, physically the challenges are pretty much always the same.
With that being said, I think I'd be remiss, because I saw in your, reading about your history and everything, that you work with Edelbrock. You talk about how you unify fuel and air. Well, that's one of the beginning points of everything. So what was it like to work with Vic Edelbrock and his group, as far as what you feed your cylinder heads?
Well, first of all, I have a lot of very close people in my life that are no longer here that I miss very much. I miss Vic. I mean, what a wonderful person he was. Great to work with. And the engineering team. So I worked with Rick Roberts and Brent McCarthy. And really, Brent and I are the ones that really worked on the big block manifold that I think everybody kind of knows me for. And again, as things changed and as we learned more, and the engine combinations became more demanding, because obviously that's the other side of it. If we went from, the biggest big block we ever had was, a 400-inch big block, or 396 or 454, right? If that's the biggest one we ever had, doesn't take much cylinder head to feed that. But now we're up at, 632, with standard bore space blocks and stuff. So the demand on the cylinder head, kept going up as we kept, getting crazier with engines. So the relationship with Edelbrock was, that was one of the most fun experiences I've had in this business. It was really nice to, step away from being the business owner and running a shop and doing all the stuff that I really don't like to do, and just be the engineer. So it was a total joy. And out of that, that the conventional big block manifolds that they still sell today and are still one of the front running manifolds, the 2896 short deck and 2897s, the Super Victor 2, I think they call it. So yeah, it was a real pleasure to work with them. So design wise, we were going from what they had, they had Super Victor manifolds before. And I have to admit, some of this, I don't want to say it was easy, but it was easier than I expected. Excuse me. But it's because we were making this jump, in power and engine sizes and stuff. So the previous designs, the runners were too small. The entry area into the runners were too small. There's a particular taper rate that an intake manifold likes to see. None of that was present. They had very different lengths of runners all in the same manifold. There was a lot of things that that we know today wasn't happy. So making those corrections got me to where we were.
All right, I got to ask this question. I know we're getting kind of close to the end of our session. The difference between road race and short track head design versus a high RPM drag race head.
Glad you asked this. I'd like to ask you this. Yeah.
I'll take the fifth on that one.
Nice. So, circling back to the fact that we have all this control now, and we can control all these cross-sectional areas, airspeed, and pressure differentials. So now we can have a much greater control over the personality of the engine. So, a high RPM drag race engine in a 2,200 pound chassis, pro stock car, whatever it is, you can put a pretty darn big cylinder head on it you can not have a real crisp airspeed in it, and it'll work just fine, because you're going to spend your whole time, between say $7,000 and $9,000, well, pro stock. So let's between 9,000 and 11,000, wherever. Road race is a completely different thing. So, road race in a circle track car, you have to get the car up off the corner. So it's got to have crisp throttle response or good throttle response. It's got to have, good power and good torque at a lower RPM range. Let's say a short track car, maybe you're coming up off the corner, at 4,000 RPM, and you're at 8,000 at the end of the straight. Well, you got to make that thing run all the way through. It's got to come up off the corner, and as you know, you don't come off the corner, you're not making the pass at the end of the straight. It's just not going to happen. But you also have to have the power at the end of the straight. You got to have the high end speed. So, now that's the challenge. So port design has a huge effect on that. You might not have as big of pressure differentials. You might have a port that doesn't have a lot of expansion rate over the short term. You might maintain your airspeed, and you might, keep your port, cross-sectional areas more even. So it's, there's not a lot of changes there. So the thing has a very flat and even, horsepower and torque curve through the range. But then again, now that you're a little bit, you can be a little bit bigger, or you can manage that airspeed better, that you can start having more freedom in camshaft. All the circle track stuff that I tended to work on, we went down that range. Ports usually ended up a little bit bigger than the engine builders expected. And they discovered they had to go back and work on the camshaft, that their standard cams, weren't cutting the mustard. The other thing is now it gives you some tuning ability. If you have a driver that's not gentle on the throttle, that a guy that just whacks the throttle off the corner, burns the tires off, right? Well, now you can start working on, you can go as far as design the entire induction system for that, as well as camshaft and things like that, make it a little bit softer so the guy didn't knock the tires off, if you want to go that route. And then somebody that's got great throttle response, really good with the foot, you can be very aggressive. All of this is, now that we have all this control, we have all this tuning ability. So I would typically be a little bit crisper on cylinder heads, a little bit smaller. You can't put a drag race head on a circle track car or road race car and expect it to perform. It doesn't work.
Well, kind of like you say, back in the day when Junior was running those 180-degree headers, and we could do a lot of things because of the bottom end torque that he built in the engines. And with someone like Daryl, even Kale, not quite as much Daryl, but Daryl was so soft footed. He could sit there and take all the back pressure in the cylinder you wanted, because he loved torque, and he could get that cylinder to come up off the corner, keeping them hooked up. And by the time he got up on the straightaway, he could get her wide open and get to the flag stand for anybody else, and then roll back out of it and then feather foot it right back in again. It was poetry to listen to. It really was. Yeah,
that's talent. Nice.
Well, speaking of talent, Francis, I believe Mr. Curtis right here has shared a lot of his talent with us today. I really enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully all of those out there, enjoyed as much as I did. Thank you, Curtis.
There is one quick question. Do you want to address that quickly?
Oh yeah, just popped up here. Can you share any of your tricks to manage the airflow around the port short turn?
Do we have another hour?
Oh, we'll get Judy to line you back up.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's and you're welcome to share my email if you want. But really, you have to. The only way to turn the air around a short turn, you have to slow it down to turn it. You have a certain amount of energy. Air just wants to go straight. Air doesn't want to do anything you tell it to. So, big, wide, short turns, there's a reason you see that. You're trying to slow the air over the short turn. as well as short turn shapes. A lot of my later port designs, I don't believe in, putting a fin in the floor of the port, but if we had a, say this is the short turn and the valve's on this side and this is the rest of the port, I started putting like a little hump in the center of the port that would kind of help the air go over the center of the short turn. That's a nice little trick that works.
Keep it attached so it can make the turn.
That's right.
Thank you, Jim. We appreciate your question right there. I kind of snuck in right there at the last second though, but
And Curtis, why don't you share your email address just so people have it?
So it's easy. It's curtis@cboggs.com. It's curtis@cboggs.com.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Curtis. That was a delight to have you on, and thank you very much. Great pleasure. So this webinar has been recorded. It will be distributed later on the ePortrait platform and through our newsletters and social media channels. We will be back next week for episode 441, Jeff, with Sadev, and we'll be talking transmission, actually a sequential transmission with Sadev. So in the meantime, for any updates and more resources, please visit www.eportrait.com. Once again, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
thank you, Curtis.
ePortrait is a digital platform that we've created basically to make life easier in the business community of auto racing.
ePortrait, there is no e-commerce. It's literally a connection just like at a trade show. So now, any time of the year, a buyer could reach out to a supplier.
When you see a product that you're interested in, all you need to do is click on request more information, and then from there it is forwarded directly to the buyer or to the supplier.
ePortrait really eliminates having to travel, closing down your shop. Now you have a place to showcase globally your racing product and technology.
Land speed record holder George Poteet's Speed Demon rocketed 481 miles per hour at the Bonneville Salt Flats. You don't go that fast without ARP fasteners.
There is no way that we could go the speed that we've gone, the number of times we've gone, with a lesser quality bolt than ARP supplies to us. And we absolutely wouldn't be where we were today if it weren't for ARP.
When failure is not an option, it's ARP-bolts.com.
We're Performance Plus Global Logistics. Our team of dedicated performance industry and logistics experts get valuable cars and components to the track on time in top condition. We provide expedited logistics solutions for the performance industry using direct routes instead of deferred options, and communicate all necessary information to the appropriate resources to meet regulations and ensure a smooth transit and secure delivery, both domestically and internationally. And we exceed customer expectations by providing best-in-class service with an efficient and cost-effective system in place. Contact us today to book your next shipment.
You work as hard as your truck, and you have no time for downtime. That's why more truck owners trust Blue Def, America's #1 diesel exhaust fluid brand. Each batch is guaranteed pure, so you can avoid costly repairs caused by inferior DEF. Demand America's best for your truck. Blue Def and Blue Def Platinum. Put trust in your truck.
With roots in the Midwest that date back well before the Model T, Fifth Third Bank has a long history of serving the needs of automotive companies. While much has changed over the years, our passion for helping businesses put cars on the road and on the track has not. Today, we are more committed than ever as a member of SEMA, a founding member of PRI, and a sponsor of multiple race teams across several racing series.
For over a decade, Fifth Third Bank has been a staunch supporter of our industry and a great partner for many companies in the motorsports field.
Our business has been growing extremely fast, and really we could not be where we are today without Fifth Third. They provided amazing strategic advice, the capital we need to support our phases of growth.
They are true partners for me now, and what they do with their involvement in motorsports is untouched in this community.
Where can we take your business? Fifth Third Bank.
Where will you find Ferrea racing components? Circle track, drag racing, and any top race shop. In every form of motorsports competition, our valves and valve train components deliver race-proven design and technology. And we've brought that same performance to our street applications as well. We're backed by 5 decades of experience, an extensive range of off-the-shelf components, and our custom valve department has the fastest turnaround times in the industry. Ferrea Racing Components. Stand with us or race against us.
Scriber Plastics has provided professional strength shipping containers to the automotive and performance industry for over 40 years. We have containers that will fit most any configuration of complete or partial engines and transmissions. Today we highlight part number 5148 cylinder head shipping and storage container. Base has double walled durable construction featuring a cinch strap with an abrasion sleeve that securely fits your small block, big block, and pro stock heads to the base at all times. Talk to your dealers and distributors about the shipping and storage container for cylinder heads from Scriber Plastics, part number 5148.